They say caring for others is a virtue, that kindness means holding space, carrying burdens, being the emotional anchor in every storm. But what happens when that care becomes a quiet obligation, a weight you never agreed to carry? When every sigh, every silence, every shift in someone's mood feels like your responsibility to fix, there is a silent pattern hidden beneath empathy, one that turns connection into pressure and love into quiet exhaustion. Why do some people feel responsible for emotions that were never theirs? Where does this invisible duty begin? And why is it so hard to let go? This is not just kindness. It is something deeper. Let's begin. There is a moment that often goes unnoticed. Not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet shift in awareness. You begin to realize that you are not just listening to people. You are absorbing them. Their tone, their pauses, the subtle changes in their energy. It doesn't feel like effort. It feels natural, almost automatic. But slowly, something else begins to surface. A quiet tension, constant scanning. You find yourself asking questions that never quite leave your mind. Are they okay? Did something change? Did you say something wrong? And if something feels off, you don't just notice it. You feel responsible for it. This is where the burden begins. Not as a conscious choice, but as a silent agreement you never realized you made. An agreement to monitor, to adjust, to soften yourself in order to keep the emotional atmosphere stable. Because when others are okay, you feel okay. But when they are not, something inside you tightens. Can look like kindness from the outside, like attentiveness, like emotional intelligence. And in many ways, it is. But there is a difference between empathy and emotional responsibility. One allows connection, the other creates pressure. You might notice how difficult it is to simply exist around others without feeling the need to manage something, to fix, to reassure, to step in before discomfort fully forms. Even silence can feel heavy, as if it holds a problem waiting to be solved. And so you fill it, not always with words, but with presence, with subtle adjustments, with yourself. Over time, this becomes exhausting, not in a way that is easy to explain, but in a quiet, internal way. A kind of emotional fatigue that builds without clear cause. Because nothing happened. There was no conflict, no crisis, just a constant, invisible effort to keep everything okay. And yet, there is rarely space to question it, because it feels like who you are, the one who understands, the one who holds, the one who makes things easier for everyone else. But beneath that identity, there is often a question that lingers, unspoken. What happens when no one is holding you? Patterns like these rarely appear out of nowhere. They are not random traits or personality quirks. They are shaped quietly, over time, in environments where emotions were not always safe or predictable. In the beginning, it often looks like sensitivity. A child noticing subtle changes, a shift in tone, a look that lingers too long, a silence that feels heavier than it should. But for some, these small observations are not just noticed. They are learned as signals. Signals that something is wrong. And when something is wrong, there is often an unspoken expectation. Stay quiet, stay alert, don't make it worse, or sometimes, make it better. In homes where emotions were unstable, unpredictable, or overwhelming, children begin to adapt in ways that are rarely visible. They learn to read the room before speaking, to anticipate reactions before expressing themselves, to shrink, soften, or step forward depending on what keeps the environment calm. This is not a conscious strategy. It is survival. Because when safety depends on emotional stability, awareness becomes protection. And slowly, that awareness turns into responsibility. Not because anyone explicitly said, "This is your job," but because the alternative felt unsafe. Maybe it was a parent whose mood shifted without warning, or an environment where conflict felt like something to avoid at all costs, or even emotional neglect, where the absence of connection made you believe you had to earn it by being good, easy, or understanding. And so, a quiet belief begins to form. If others are upset, something must be done. If something must be done, it must be done by you. This belief doesn't feel like pressure at first. It feels like purpose, like being needed, like being the one who can keep things from falling apart. But over time, it stops being a role and becomes an identity. You are no longer just someone who cares. You become someone who feels responsible for care itself. And even as life changes, environments shift, and people come and go, the pattern remains. Because it was never about them. It was something learned much earlier. Something that once helped you feel safe. But now it follows you, even when there is nothing left to survive. What feels like responsibility is often something far more complex. Not a choice, but a pattern deeply wired into the mind and body. A system that learned, over time, that other people's emotions are not separate from your own. The brain does not naturally confuse boundaries. It learns to, especially in environments where emotional signals carried consequences. Over time, the nervous system begins to associate another person's distress with personal urgency, not because it belongs to you, but because it feels like it does. This is where hypervigilance begins to take shape, a heightened awareness of emotional cues, a constant scanning for subtle shifts, tone, expression, silence. It is not overthinking. It is conditioning, the mind trying to stay one step ahead of discomfort before it fully arrives. But this awareness does not come without cost. Because when you are always watching, always anticipating, you are never at rest. Even calm moments can feel temporary, as if something beneath the surface is waiting to change. There is also the quiet influence of attachment. The way connection was experienced early on shapes how safety is felt later. If love once felt conditional, dependent on being agreeable, understanding, or emotionally supportive, then closeness becomes tied to performance. Not in a visible way, but in a subtle, internal sense of duty. And so, emotional responsibility becomes a way to preserve connection, to prevent distance, to avoid rejection before it happens. Because if others feel okay around you, they stay. And if they stay, there is safety. But this creates a fragile balance. One where your sense of stability depends on something you cannot fully control. Other people's emotions. This is why it feels so heavy. Because no matter how much you give, adjust, or manage, emotions are unpredictable. They shift. They fluctuate. They exist independently. And yet, the mind continues to respond as if it must intervene. As if every feeling is a signal. Every silence a question. Every change something to solve. Not because you are weak. Not because you are too sensitive. But because, at some point, your system learned that this is what it means to stay connected. And what once protected you, now quietly exhausts you. There is a quiet tension that lives beneath this pattern. Not always visible, not always acknowledged, but always present. A pull in two directions that never fully resolves. On one side, there is a longing, a desire to feel free, to exist without constantly monitoring, adjusting, or carrying what does not belong to you. To sit in a room and simply be, without feeling responsible for the emotional weight in the air. And on the other side, there is fear, subtle but powerful. Because what happens if you stop? What happens if you no longer step in, no longer soften yourself, no longer make things easier for everyone else? Will something break? Will someone pull away? Will you be seen differently? Or worse, not seen at all? This is where the conflict deepens, because the part of you that wants rest begins to feel like a threat to the part of you that learned how to survive. And so, even when exhaustion sets in, there is hesitation, a quiet guilt that appears the moment you consider stepping back. It doesn't shout, it whispers, telling you that you are being selfish, that you are not doing enough, that something might go wrong if you are not paying attention. This guilt can feel convincing, not because it is true, but because it is familiar. It echoes old patterns, old environments where your role felt necessary, where your presence made a difference. But now it creates a silent pressure, one that keeps you in a constant state of responsibility, even when nothing is being asked of you. You may notice how difficult it is to prioritize your own emotional space, How quickly your attention shifts outward the moment someone else seems off. How your own feelings wait, quietly, while you tend to everyone else's. And yet, beneath all of this, there is a question that begins to surface. Is this care, or is this fear? Because true care does not demand the loss of yourself. It does not require constant vigilance. It does not ask you to carry what was never yours. But fear often does. And recognizing the difference is not easy. It means questioning something that has felt like part of your identity for so long. But within that discomfort, there is also the beginning of something else. A shift, subtle but real. There is rarely a single moment when everything becomes clear. No dramatic turning point. No sudden awakening that changes everything overnight. Instead, it begins quietly, almost imperceptibly. A feeling that something is off. You notice the exhaustion more clearly. Not just physical but emotional. A kind that lingers even after conversations end. Even after everything seems fine. You begin to realize that it's not the situations themselves that drain you, but the way you carry them long after they're over. And then, a question appears. Soft, but persistent. What if this was never yours to carry? At first, the mind resists. It searches for reasons to dismiss the thought. It reminds you of all the times you helped, all the moments you prevented conflict, all the ways you made things easier for others. Tells you this is who you are. This is what you do. But the question doesn't disappear. It lingers in small moments. When someone is upset and you feel the familiar urge to fix it, but hesitate. When silence fills the space and, for once, you don't rush to fill it. When you notice someone's mood shift, and instead of absorbing it, you simply observe it. These moments feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because they challenge something deeply ingrained. The belief that your role is to manage what others feel. And yet, within that discomfort, there is a quiet sense of relief. A realization that emotions can exist without your intervention. That someone else's sadness, frustration, or distance does not automatically require your response. That you can care without carrying. This realization does not erase the pattern overnight. The instincts remain. The urge to step in, to fix, to adjust. It still appears. But now there is awareness alongside it. A space between the feeling and the reaction. And in that space, something changes. You begin to see the difference between being present and being responsible. Between understanding and absorbing. Between connection and control. It is not a loud shift. It does not demand attention. But it is real. Because for the first time, there is a possibility you may have overlooked before. That you are allowed to exist without carrying everything. Letting go of this responsibility is not as simple as deciding to stop. It is not a switch that can be turned off or a habit that disappears with awareness alone. Because what you are releasing is not just behavior. It is something that once felt like safety. And the mind does not easily let go of what it believes protects you. So when you begin to step back, even slightly, something inside you reacts. A quiet discomfort. A sense that you are doing something wrong. You may notice the familiar urge to check in, to fix, to make sure everything is still okay. And when you resist that urge, there can be a subtle anxiety that follows. Not because anything is actually wrong, but because it feels unfamiliar. For a long time, your sense of stability came from managing the emotional environment around you. From ensuring that things remained calm, predictable, safe. And now, by stepping back, you are allowing space for uncertainty. For emotions to exist without your intervention. This can feel unsettling. Because without that constant involvement, there is a question that begins to surface. If you are not responsible for how others feel, then what are you responsible for? At first, this space can feel empty, almost disorienting. But slowly, something else begins to emerge. A different kind of awareness. One that is not focused outward but inward. You start to notice your own emotional state more clearly. The feelings that were often set aside, postponed, or quietly ignored. And with that awareness, there is a shift. Subtle but meaningful. You begin to understand that stepping back is not the same as disconnecting. that allowing others to feel what they feel is not abandonment. That presence does not require control. This is where the idea of boundaries begins to change, not as walls that separate you from others, but as clarity, a recognition of where you end and someone else begins. And within that clarity, there is something unexpectedly gentle. You can still care, you can still listen, you can still be present, but you are no longer carrying what was never yours. And in that quiet release, something within you begins to breathe again. There is a stillness that begins to form when the weight is no longer constantly carried. Not a dramatic relief, not a sudden transformation, but something quieter, something more subtle. At first, it may feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because for so long your awareness was shaped by others. Their emotions, their reactions, their needs, the constant movement outward. And now, as that movement softens, there is space. Space that was once filled with monitoring, adjusting, anticipating. And in that space, you begin to notice yourself again. Not as a role, not as the one who holds everything together, but as someone with their own internal world, their own feelings, rhythms, and limits, things that may have been overlooked for a long time. This return is not loud. It does not demand attention. It happens in small moments, in the pause before reacting, in the decision not to absorb what you notice, in the quiet understanding that someone else's emotions can exist without becoming yours. There is a softness in this realization, a kind of internal permission. You may still feel the pull sometimes, the old instinct to step in, to fix, to take responsibility. But now there is space between the feeling and the action. And in that space there is choice, not forced, not pressured, just present. And slowly, the identity that once felt so fixed begins to loosen. You are no longer defined by how much you carry, by how much you manage, by how much you hold for others. Instead, there is a different kind of presence that begins to take shape. One that allows connection without losing yourself inside it. One that recognizes the difference between compassion and responsibility. This does not mean you stop caring. It means your care no longer comes at the cost of your own emotional space. And in that shift, something within you settles. Not perfectly, not permanently, but enough to feel a sense of quiet stability that does not depend on everything around you being okay. A stability that comes from within. And perhaps, for the first time, you begin to experience what it feels like to simply exist, without carrying the entire room with you. If this reflection made something inside you feel seen, if parts of it felt quietly familiar, then maybe you have been carrying more than anyone ever realized. Not because you were asked to, but because at some point it felt necessary. It felt like the way to stay connected, to stay safe, to stay close to the people around you. And yet, the weight of that responsibility can become invisible, so normal that it is rarely questioned. But you are not alone in this experience. There are many who move through the world in the same quiet way, holding more than they show, managing more than they speak of. And perhaps slowly, gently, it is okay to begin loosening that weight. Not all at once, not perfectly, just enough to notice that you are allowed to exist without carrying everything. If you'd like to stay connected to reflections like this, to a space where the hidden patterns of the human mind are explored with care, you are always welcome here. And if you feel comfortable, you can share your thoughts below. Not because you have to, but because your words might quietly remind someone else that they are not alone either. Take care of yourself. You deserve gentleness.